For this course, let's imagine your company needs a database that tracks production issues, problems with suppliers or parts or quality control. The people who will use the database are located all around your building, and they need to use the database at any time from anywhere. You can solve that problem with a web database, and a web database is simply one that you build in Access and then publish to SharePoint. From there, your coworkers use the database in their browsers. All they need is a connection to your corporate network. Depending on their permission level, users can enter and change data, or just read data. So, before I get into the nuts and bolts of web databases, you need to know some rules. First, Access distinguishes between client and web databases. A client database is the standard ActDB file that runs in Access, while a web database runs on a SharePoint server. Access also differentiates between client and web objects. Client objects only work in client databases, while web objects are those that you can publish to SharePoint. What's more, web databases can contain client objects, but you can't publish those objects. The publish process ignores them, and you can only use them when the database is open in the Access client. And if you're wondering why you do that, we'll look at some reasons in the practice. Access also provides some visual cues to help you distinguish between web and client objects. For example, in the navigation pane, the web objects are represented by icons with small globes, and Access also changes the ribbon. For example, you have the Design View button in a client database, but not in a web database. Other commands will be disabled, such as the Relationships button here, or they'll be grouped into a set of menus labeled Client, like so. One exception to that rule is the VBA commands here, but remember that if you do write VBA code, it won't run on SharePoint. In addition to those rules, you also need to be aware of some prerequisites. First, you need a server that runs SharePoint 2010. You need to have Access services running on that server. And your IT department will need to create accounts on the server for each person who will use the database. As the database creator, you'll need full control permissions. Users who will enter and change data need contributor permissions, and users who can only view data need read permissions. While you're at it, make sure your IT department gives you the URL of the server. You can't publish without it. And finally, don't worry about memorizing all these requirements. We list them for you in the quick reference card at the end of this course. Once you have those pieces in place, the fastest way to create a web database is to use one of the templates that Access provides, and you'll find those here on the New tab under Sample Templates. I'll select the Issues web database, give it a name, and click Create. The database opens, and at this point you can take several actions. You can customize the template. You can add some initial data, such as a set of users. Or you can just publish the template and then change it later, and I'll show you some ways to do that in the next video. For now, I'll publish the template, and to do that I go to Backstage View, click Save and Publish, and then Publish to Access Services. Enter the URL of your SharePoint server here, and notice that Access adds it to a list so it's easier to find and reuse. Enter a name for the site, and you can see the full URL of the new site here. And then you click Publish to Access Services again. The publish process runs, and when it's complete, you see a success message. Now, here's what just happened. The publishing process converted your database into a website. Your forms are now dynamic HTML and ECMA script, and your tables are now SharePoint lists. Also, just so you know, the database doesn't run on Access at all. It lives on the SharePoint server, and that's where it runs. After you publish, you only use Access to change the database, and after you make your changes, you save them to the web by synchronizing Access with SharePoint. To do that, you go to Backstage View, and on the Info tab, you click Sync All. And I'll show you more about changing and synchronizing a web database in the next video.